I don't understand what this is. What is happening with the coral? Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some underhyped books on my TBR. So, like other booktubers out there, I read a lot of hyped books that are making the rounds, that are really popular, that everyone has heard about. But I know that I definitely have some underhyped books that are on my TBR that I've heard literally no one talk about except for myself, and like maybe I've heard it mentioned a couple of times, if that, on social media, but very rarely have I heard these books talked about. And I wanted to hype them up a little bit today, give them some love that they deserve, and just because I am so excited about them, I want to talk about them. So that is what we're doing today. So that's really, I feel like, the only explanation you need for this video. So let's just jump into it. The very first book that I want to talk about today is the only classic on this list, and that is Summer by Edith Wharton. Now, this is a classic that I've heard nothing about. Edith Wharton is a name that I've heard mentioned a few times, but I don't think I've actually ever read anything by this author. But this book was written in 1917, and it follows our main heroine who is living in this like sleepy little English town that she's very bored, and then a visiting architect comes and they strike up a romance, and this is all about a young woman's first time having sex and discovering that side of romance. And this was very taboo for the time that it was written in, and that is what intrigues me the most about this, is that a lot of classics don't even touch that side, or at least the ones that I have read don't even touch that side. And the fact that this one just dives right into it, I find very interesting. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to go because of everything that I just said. And also, like, I think it tackles like society and just the world as a whole at this time, and it sounds very interesting. So I've heard like no one mention this. I didn't even know this was a book until I stumbled upon it in like a secondhand bookstore and was like, yes, this sounds like something I need to read. The next one that is kind of underhyped and I have never heard mentioned is Mary B by Catherine J. Chin. This is kind of a reimagining of the sister Mary in Pride and Prejudice. She is the middle sister of the 5 Bennet girls, and she is basically talked about in Pride and Prejudice as having like no beauty, like she's boring. She has like no personality. She just reads and plays piano, and like that's her life. And so this is kind of like a reimagining of her story before, during, and after the story of Pride and Prejudice, and it just gives her a chance to be a person. And the character of Mary always intrigued me because I always was under the assumption that Mary and Mr. Collins should have been together, and that's just kind of like the headcanon that I have created for this character. So I have always been interested in Mary, and I'm really intrigued to see how it's going to go with this one, because it looks, from the insert here, it sounds like it's going to be scandalous as well, and I'm curious as to what on earth could happen with that. I don't know, like, it just sounds really interesting, and I'm a little bitter that I've never heard anyone talk about this, because it came out in 2018, so it's been out for a couple of years, and I've heard zero talk about this. I think my dad sent me an article on this and was like, this sounds like it's up your alley, and I said, yes, it does. And that's all I know about it. The next one is one that I've talked about a lot, but I haven't heard anybody else talk about, and that is A Rogue of One's Own by Evie Dunmore. This is the companion novel to Bringing Down the Duke that I read earlier this year, and I heard Haley from Haley and Bookland mention this book randomly, which is what grabbed my attention, but she mentioned it like a couple times, and then that's it. I've never heard anyone talk about that book or this one either, and this is just a companion that follows some characters from that book, but I think it takes place before that book. But I loved Evie Dunmore's writing. I think she's incredibly creative because these are romance books, but they're historical fiction romances, and they tackle some hard topics as well, because these all kind of revolve around the suffragette movement, which is fascinating. And I absolutely loved the first one. I think her writing's amazing. And this is just the next one in this companion series, but I'm just really excited about this, and I've heard no one talk about it, and I think that Evie Dunmore, wow, I said her name really weird. I honestly think Evie Dunmore deserves a lot more love because her writing's fantastic. Seriously, like, give her a shot. But this is her sequel, and I'm ecstatic to read that one as well. The next one, I've got a lot on here that are like historical fiction now that I'm realizing this, but the next one is called Jane Steele by Lindsay Fay. This is a retelling of Jane Eyre, except for if Jane Eyre was like, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a serial killer, kind of. And that's why she had to run away, and like, that's why she ends up with Mr. Rochester. This sounds incredible. And I've heard no one talk about this. And like, I just feel like the story of Jane Eyre is a very well-loved story that a lot of people really do love to read, especially during like the spookier seasons, because it's very gothic. And this retelling just gives it an even like, not spookier, but like more of that fall vibe to it. And I've heard no one talk about this, and it just sounds incredible. The next one I've definitely talked about a lot on the channel as well, but I've heard no one talk about this or this author at all, and that is the Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen by Sir James. I read the Missing Manuscript of Jane Austen by Sir James earlier this year. I freaking loved it, and this is basically the same idea except for their memoirs of Jane Austen. And this book is basically like represented as if this is the memoir of Jane Austen that has actually been found. And the introduction is even like this is how we found these memoirs, even though this is entirely a fictional book. But I really love Cherie James's writing. I think it's very, very good, especially for fans of Jane Austen, because she kind of writes like Jane Austen normally, and then if you take like her memoir, it sounded just like Jane Austen. It had all of the Jane Austen things in it. So I'm really excited to see kind of her take on her life. But again, have never heard anyone mention this. The next one is a sci-fi. It's actually a YA sci-fi that I just stumbled upon in Barnes & Noble, but I've literally heard no one talk about it, and it is called The XY by Virginia Bergen. This is basically the story of like a futuristic world where men, or the people who have XY chromosomes, do not exist, and our main character is a girl who just happens to stumble upon a guy on the side of the road, and all dudes are supposed to, like, in theory, everyone with an XY chromosome is supposed to not exist and is supposed to be dead. And so when she finds a living, breathing human boy, what that happens with that. And I just love this idea. I don't know why, it's just very interesting to me. And I feel like this would be up so many people's alleys, but I've never heard anyone mention it. So I'm excited about this one as well. There are so many historical fictions because I have 3 more books left and they are all historical fiction. Cool. The next one is more historical fiction fantasy, and I have definitely mentioned it before on this channel, and that is The Witches of St Petersburg by Imogen Edwards Jones. This is basically takes place during the time of like Anastasia's parents, and these 2 sisters, I believe there are 2 sisters, who basically just want to be like loved and be married into positions of power because that's what their family wants them to do, come to the Romanov court, and they do dabble in the occult. And so the queen, or the Tsarina, I think is how she is called, is having trouble giving birth to an heir, and these 2 sisters basically help her out. And then of course all of the court intrigues and like the bad things that come along with using witchcraft and all of that stuff. It sounds fascinating. And I love the time period of like the Romanov court. I think that's very, very interesting. So this sounds like it's going to be great. And I've heard 0 people talk about it. So, ooh, I'm excited. So I think Rasputin like shows up for a hot second as well. I don't know. It just, it sounds good. And it's historical fiction with fantasy elements. I feel like this would be a lot of people's thing. And again, have heard no one talk about it. The next one is one that I definitely meant to read this summer and just didn't, because I'm a terrible person. And that is To Have and to Hoax by Martha Waters. This is a kind of rom-com set in like the Regency England time period where a husband and wife have been, I think, married for 5 years, and after a year of marriage something happened and they had a big fight and they cannot get along. And so something sparks the two of them to basically kind of start this prank war, kind of, and then I think they fall back in love with each other, and that just sounds beautiful. I read a lot of books where it's a lot of they fall in love for the first time, whereas these two have been in love before and they're just trying to find each other again. But there's like a prank war, and the end is set in a historical setting. So yes, this sounds like it's right up my alley, and I'm very excited I'm very excited about this one. I only saw this on like Bookstagram, like by a couple people when it first came out, because it did come out this year in April, but like that's it. I've never heard anybody else talk about it, and this just sounds like so many people's thing. Anyway, so I'm excited by that one as well. I'm just getting so excited by all of these books. And now I'm back in like a historical fiction mood. And the last book that I am going to talk about is Suitors and Sabotage by Cindy Ansley. So basically this follows our main girl named Imogen, and she's an aspiring artist, and so she's had a very successful London season, and her father has basically said, this is the suitor for you. So she goes to this suitor's house, but instead of feeling any kind of affection for him, she starts to fall for his brother. The brother is an architectural apprentice, but he cannot draw, so she offers to help him out, and they start to have the feelings for each other. But then there's a lot of accidents that happen in this house against this brother, and it kind of sounds like it's going to be a kind of like romance mystery, because they're trying to figure out what's happening and make sure that this brother is safe. I don't know, but it sounds really good. And again, I've heard zero people talk about this. I stumbled upon this online and it sounded good, and that's why I grabbed it. But like, I've heard no one talk about this. Like on the front it even says, in which falling in love with the wrong gentleman is the least of a lady's worries because someone is after her. This just sounds so incredibly good. So those are I don't even know how many I had here. 9? I had 9. Wow, I couldn't come up with one more. Those are a handful of books that I consider underhyped, that are on my TBR, that I'm very, very excited for, and I've heard no one talk about. Please let me know down below if you've heard of any of these books, and if you've read them, please tell me what your thoughts are. Or if there's a book out there that you consider really, really underhyped that everybody should read, please let me know. I would love some great recommendations from you guys for underhyped books. Let's chat about them. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I very much hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there if you want to follow along on any of those, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!